So this is Eric Hess with the Encrypted Economy. So we cover a lot of DAO legal engineering on this podcast today with Jordan Teague and Ross Campbell of Lex DAO, and they're talking today about Kali DAO, which is a fascinating new project that they just released. And if you listen to this podcast and you want to hear another one with Ross without a lot of overlap that also covers Kali DAO, I highly recommend a recent episode that Jacob Robinson did with him on the Law of Code podcast. Now, Jacob is also a member of the Lex DAO community, and that is why Jacob beat me to the punch on covering the Kali DAO drop. So curses, Jacob, you foiled me. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Don't worry, we cover a lot of ground and there's a lot to cover here. So I tooled around a bit with Kali DAO before it was officially released, and I was so impressed that I just pressed on to get connected with Ross and Jordan, and this podcast did not disappoint. Now, if you have anything to do with legal in this space, you're going to enjoy this podcast. If you don't have anything to do with legal on this space, this is base camp for DAO legal engineering. So everybody wins. So refer this podcast to others. You get extra points if you refer this one and the Carla Reyes podcast we recently did on security interests together. You'll get extra points. I'll send you gold stars. Anyway, really excited to present this to you and looking forward to it. So with that, I bring you Jordan Teague and Ross Campbell. Welcome to the Encrypted Economy, a weekly podcast featuring discussions exploring the business, laws, regulations, security, and technologies relating to digital assets and data. I am Eric Hess, founder of Hess Legal Counsel. I've spent decades representing regulated exchanges, broker-dealers, investment advisors, and all manner of fintech companies for all things touching electronic trading with a focus on new and developing technologies. So, the Encrypted Economy today, we have Ross Campbell and Jordan Teague. They are with Lex DAO. Welcome.
Thank you.
Wonderful to be here. Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to this. First of all, Lex DAO is sort of like a cousin of another group I'm part of, which is Lex Punk Army. So I work with that crew, and obviously I'm very familiar with Lex DAO. There's a lot of cross-pollination, but so Lex DAO has basically released the Kali DAO. And Kali DAO is, and I'm going to let them explain it versus trying to explain it myself, but Kali DAO is basically a legal hack to really help, fair launch companies and such get started with a lot of the legal forms and documentation that they need to get going with their DAO. So, but before maybe even getting into that, maybe we could get a background from each of you, as to how, your Genesis block, how you got to be where you are today, and then we'll take it from there. Who wants to go first?
Go for it, Ross.
Oh God, I should have picked one. I should have picked one. It. Jordan, yeah. You go first.
Fair enough. Ladies first. My name is Jordan Teague. I am a practicing attorney located in the States. I've been practicing for about 10 years now. I'm also a Solidity developer and a legal engineer with Lex DAO. So I guess kind of how I got here, my Genesis block is ever since I was 10 years old, and I'm going to be dating myself here talking about Web 1.0, but back in the early days of the internet when things were really weird, I was a little kid poking around, building random websites, learning all that I could. I've always been kind of a coder by hobby. Learning things along the way as new technology developed, whether it was deploying things on the App Store or learning basic, kind of Web 2.0 database frameworks. But about a year ago, I went down the Solidity rabbit hole, and it has a very interesting and unique tie to what I do as a lawyer. We call the applications that we develop on the blockchain smart contracts. And, they really are a hybrid of software applications and or hardware, if you want to call it that, and contracts. And so I think that, as a lawyer, I bring a unique perspective to the development of those. But also as a developer, a budding smart contract developer, it really helps me in my Web3 legal practice. I'm one of the core devs on Team Kali, which Ross is a part of. And Ross, I guess I'll flip the mic to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm also, I guess, a lawyer by trade and background, practiced here in New York for a couple of years before going full-time crypto. When I joined the crypto space, I worked for a venture studio called Consensus and the Open Law Project, which was focused on doc automation for Web3 founders, adding ways to call smart contracts from e-signature. And that sort of led us to looking at DAOs, sort of in the aftermath of the DAO hack and sort of the fallout of, that whole experiment. We still saw really good opportunities for founders to do fundraisers and for investment clubs to use DAOs and smart contract technology to, organize membership, keep track of capital, and actually get money into founders' hands. So we launched the LAO as a Delaware LLC, DAO. We built, I guess, some open source tools in the Moloch DAO framework as well, that have been, I think, popularized and now hold, millions of dollars in crypto assets. After I worked for the Open Law Project and launched a couple other investment DAOs, such as Flamingo DAO, I joined the SushiSwap project as a full-time Solidity developer. Solidity is like my first programming language, and it really, tickled my brain to see ways to actually take what I was doing as a lawyer, similar to what Jordan said, organizing people by agreements, launching new assets on paper, but actually putting the rules into code to govern people and govern sort of their transactional relationships going into the future. So when I worked for SushiSwap, I worked on some DeFi applications such as a vault we call Bento Box, the Trident AMM rapid deployment system, and now I'm focusing on Kali through Lex DAO to sort of bring teams and protocols together using smart contracts and also a legal framework that we're developing as well through Lex DAO. So it's been a very interesting journey for me, going from corporate attorney background to sort of full-time crypto developer degen. But I do think that you never lose the lawyer side of yourself. So we're constantly thinking about risk, in terms of smart contract development. But with Kali, we want to think about legal risk. It's really the only attack vector that a lot of protocols have exposed that they're not, treating appropriately. So it's a problem that we think is solvable, and we think it can be solved with software as well. So that's a bit of my background, I would say.
Excellent, excellent. So before we get even into Kali DAO, let's talk a little bit about Lex DAO. How it formed, what is its origin story?
Sure. I guess I can go into the genesis block there, if you will. So it started pretty casually. I mean, a lot of DAOs, I think, start through relationships that people form online organically around, shared passions. For, Lex DAO, there are a lot of crypto lawyers that wanted to get a bit more technical, I would say, that were embracing, not only code as law as a philosophy, but as sort of part of their practice. So I think, people with sort of this, engineering mindset for corporate transactional practice and for how they want to do agreements, that at least in my mind, we were a good candidate to be power users of smart contracts and to build our own products and to actually use DAOs ourselves to build something better than a bar association. So in terms of, founding Lex DAO, I reached out to some people on Twitter actually and through Telegram, and I was like, hey, do you guys just want to deploy a DAO, see what happens, see if we can have a cooperative, see if we can kind of fund our own projects that way, but also can we build something together? So there are, I think, 10 to 20 people that joined to start. Things kind of grew from there into a Discord server. And I think from that point, we had people like Jordan, other sort of coder attorneys join the Lex DAO Association and, start, joining our weekly Solidity development calls and, contributing to sort of our shared tooling, which is, smart contracts, as well as open source legal templates that we try to draft that, work better with smart contracts from our perspective. There are, of course, other great, groups in the space. LexPunk, big fan, close friends with Gabe Shapiro and other lawyers that are, pushing that advocacy arm forward. I think Lex DAO is more focused on the technical side of things and really beefing up people's understanding of Web3 and how it can work for them in their practice, and maybe make them a bit more, able to speak the language, if you will, and in some cases actually write the language, of these smart contracts.
And how many contributors? Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, it was a factual one. How many are you up to now in Lex DAO?
That's a great question, actually. It kind of is running itself through our de facto COO, Jared Cohen, but I think we have probably 120 to 150 people that are on the roster. We are using NFTs to sort of keep track of people these days. and to onboard people a bit more quickly.
Excellent. Sorry, I cut you off, Jordan.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just going to say, from my perspective, I think I found Lex DAO in maybe July or August of last year, and I don't even know how I found you guys. But it was really neat. I popped into this Discord, which was probably my first time in Discord, and I saw these lawyer coders working on, legal agreements that were smart contracts, and it blew my mind. And I knew, that was the group I wanted to be a part of. So, yeah, it's a really really neat thing we have going. Like Ross said, I think the focus is a bit more technical, excuse me, than other legal oriented DAOs, in that we try to certify legal engineers and or even kind of trying to flesh out what would a legal engineering certification look like, which is kind of always an ongoing debate, but involves some sort of competency in kind of the coding and legal realm.
Excellent. And then aside from Kali DAO, which I think is probably, I follow Lex DAO a little bit. I'm always aware, certainly because it's also now I'm part of Lex Army, so I kind of do view you guys as cousins. I'm not sure whether that's accurate or not. But, outside of Kali DAO, what would you say is Lex DAO's greatest accomplishment so far? Besides, it's just Constitution, the way that it's brought everybody together, of course.
Yeah, I would like to say that's the real achievement of any DAO is like creating incentives for people to actually cooperate and like move things forward. But more specifically, if we can go back to sort of the beginning, LexDAO grew up with a bunch of other DAOs, specifically Metacartel and groups like Raid Guild and DAO House and other sort of coders that I worked with personally and also can count as friends. In the early days, when Metacartel was launching, they also had a investment club called Metacartel Ventures, and myself and James McCall and others helped design a security token standard that Metacartel Ventures DAO used, and I believe it's the only, or at least the first, example of a security token, a restricted transfer token being used by a DAO for early stage equity investments entirely on chain. So I thought that was pretty cool. We kind of just put that together on the fly because I think it's been sort of the experience of LexDAO myself that like we don't know what people need in terms of like legal engineering, but if we are sort of present, if we're sort of partnering with people and like in their DAOs, we can sort of build these things and make them relevant, repeatable, and scalable. So security token standard early on, I think that's pretty cool. We also designed digital arbitration through an escrow smart contract pattern that Raid Guild has run with. They've incorporated into how they do dealings with their own clients. Our people actually on chain, myself, James McCall, and other legal engineers have done safety valve and other sort of on-chain dispute resolutions for Raid Guild. So that's a small example. That's more like friends of the family sort of ADR, but I think it's also a really cool example of, legal engineers can move really quickly and we can do things that are very interesting. More recently, with things like Kali, we do want to produce our own software. We do want to scale and grow, I think, to the potential beyond just doing these experimental things for our friends and ourselves. So I think that's kind of the next chapter of LexDAO legal engineering is like, we've collected some really good people. We've come to some agreement on standards for what legal engineering is, what the applications could be, and now can we sort of own these as sub DAOs and really push the market forward. So yeah, I think there's a couple examples of cool things that I like that we've done, but really I think that the true success has been we've added I think more than 20 certified legal engineers, and it's very hard to get certified, I would say. Because it is an ad hoc sort of like soul searching process of watching people work on their own projects and seeing if it like moves LexDAO forward and sort of meets this standard that we're curating.
Yeah, and I guess I would tag on to that and say even the fact that we can now use the term legal engineer and take that for granted, I feel like is a huge accomplishment of LexDAO. And Ross, you're one of the OGs, so maybe you have different perspective on this, but at least my perspective is LexDAO is responsible for that term's proliferation and for really kind of unpacking what does that mean. And it's exciting for people like me who really have both affinities. Love to build and I love being a lawyer, and to kind of just establish and set in stone this is actually a path that you can follow as a lawyer, I think is huge.
Yeah, for sure. And I think after, we'll start off with Kali DAO, but I do actually probably want to double click a little bit on the dispute resolution work that you've done out of Lex DAO, because I know Jordan has some views on it. When you talk about Claros and such, and the enforceability of it. But let's dive into Kali DAO a bit first, and we'll return to that toward the end. So, Kali DAO, what inspired it?
So my memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ross, is that I was probably 3 or 4 months into my Solidity journey, and I was reading the Moloch contract. And Moloch, by the way, I think we've mentioned it already during this podcast, but it is a smart contract framework that a lot of DAOs are built on. DAO House uses the Moloch smart contract, and it's a great functional DAO contract. But I was reading it kind of from the perspective of a newer developer coming in and just wondering why was this done this way? Is there not a better way? And Ross and I were chatting about code as we do, and my memory is you kind of agreed. And so we thought, why don't we just riff on something and see where we land? But that obviously, turned into a much bigger project with a much bigger reason for being.
So it's meant to be sort of an enhancement or an improvement upon Moloch DAO?
Yeah, well, so I'll toss the baton to you, Ross, so that I'm not just rambling. But I think what started as just an experiment in pure geekery turned into something, like I said, with a bigger reason for being, in the sense that I feel like one of our core missions at Kali is to make it easier for DAOs to not only deploy and to have kind of a functional system of governance, but one that actually fits into legal frameworks.
Yeah, I think that's quite accurate. And I would say there were a couple parallel paths to developing the Kali DAO smart contracts and I guess the framework. Moloch DAO is a really great, simple, smart contract for club membership. But at this point, Moloch V2, which I worked on with Amin and some Metacartel folks a couple years ago for investment clubs. I mean, it's like maybe 3 years old at this point. So there was a need to make it more contemporary while still trying to maintain a very minimal, secure code base. So in that effort, I did team up with some folks to build Moloch V3, Ball in a parallel effort, but I did realize that it wasn't really attenuated or as useful to a sort of legal framework as something that Lex DAO, experienced attorneys like Jordan, myself, and others could build, sort of push through our own, software into our own users. So we did have some opinionated changes we made. We include docs directly in the smart contract through a sort of hash variable. That's cool. We allow amendments to those docs on chain as well. We allow each proposal type, so membership versus doing a call to another smart contract or amending the voting period, to have their own threshold settings. So I think there's things like that, and hopefully we're not getting too technical already, that are a bit more glued to the reality that we see in like legal, structuring and agreements, where people want to have the flexibility to sort of, set their terms, have an off-chain representation of their agreement, but then say like, maybe I want to change my voting period. Maybe I want to have some rules about who can join the DAO and when. I want to update my transferability of my tokens and do all these other things, but also have this sort of legal context attached to it. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but basically the opportunity that we saw as legal engineers is we can build on sort of the Moloch philosophy of simple smart contracts that are designed for people, less for protocols, and then kind of bring it to market with our own style. So, I mean, Kali is the smart contracts, but it's also the legal automation software that we built on top of it as well. So we can get into that, but also in terms of the lore, why Kali? We did want to have another sort of motif. Moloch has this idea of there's a demon of coordination failures. The Moloch issue. Kali, in sort of Indic philosophy, was a goddess that destroyed demons. So we thought it'd be very interesting and sort of playful as a fork of Moloch DAO to say like, we're going to help, destroy the demons that plague coordination, that smart contracts, things like Ethereum are supposed to help solve. And also, can we do it in a way that's like legally secure? Can we solve people's legal issues that like aren't really being serviced by a lot of these DAO frameworks? So hopefully that wasn't too much of a tangent, but I think it's important to have a vibe as well if you're bringing sort of these crazy experimental softwares to the market. Yeah.
Is that where the psi comes in on the in your trademark?
Oh, the
Isn't that like a
trishula, the trident looking thing.
yes, the
Yeah,
trident looking
that's
thing?
right. It's
All
called
right.
a trishula.
Okay, I'm sorry. I went to a different. I'm in a different part of the world for the
Different
definition.
mythology. Yeah.
That's right. I should have gone alongside it. So no, I think it's interesting, and you know, I haven't used the Moloch DAO framework, but certainly, you know, with a lot of different projects that I'm working on now, um, the importance of getting some of these base level agreements on chain is really important. You know, like when you get the token that you have either a hash or you have some connection to the underlying contract, so it's not just all paper trail and can actually follow the token from one owner to the next. So that's a pain point because, you know, once things starts transferring out, then how do you ensure that there's some sort of ongoing that those terms flow with the token being transferred?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to comment on that real quick. I mean, I think we like to build applications that are unopinionated, as Ross likes to say, and I'm learning these terms as I get deeper into the solidity development space. Um, but at the end of the day, we want people to be able to configure them in a way where you're not swimming upstream with compliance, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at. If you have tokens that are just freely transferable always, that's not necessarily a problem for some DAOs, but it could potentially be a problem for others. And so, how do you create something that's flexible but gives the DAO, the tools that they need to kind of lock things down or put some guardrails on so that they're not swimming upstream trying to comply with the law?
Right. I mean, in some cases, let's say you have like a limited liability company and, you know, you can have a paper agreement that you sign on the side with the members, then you have the token that evidences it. That may work. But by the same token, if you're looking for a more fluid membership structure, like a, you know, unincorporated nonprofit association where you don't want to have each of the members have to sign an agreement, you know, it makes, you know, an LLC can be sort of, how should I say, uh, um, you know, the logistics, right, of getting in and out and shifting those membership interests can be burdensome, right? They, you know, like who's keeping track of that, right? If it's being instantiated with a token, but you know, in the context of actually putting in the hash or putting something in the agreement that links to the underlying charter, you know, you don't necessarily need to get their signature for the UNA, as you know, we'll talk about. And yet it can flow with the token. So there's that notice, there's a notification. It's the charter is binding. The charter is binding anyway, but you do want to kind of have, you know, you do want to kind of incorporate it in the transferability. And you can feel free to, you know, I'm just noting that that is, you know, something that I find very helpful in what you're talking about.
Well,
As it
and the good
relates.
thing is, as you mentioned in the governance documents that you can link up to a DAO, there's really no reason that you can't take a code deference approach and basically say taking a certain action on chain represents your assent to certain things, or represents an action that might be taken in a different way off chain. So that's one of the benefits of tokenizing assets and agreements and bringing things on chain, is it gives us more flexible ways to represent legal actions or things of legal significance without having to go through just kind of arbitrary steps of getting wedding signatures, which we all
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I use DocuSign now, but when I have to do weddings, but anyway. Um, so um, we talked a little bit about Moloch DAO, and maybe it might be good to touch on a couple of other topics that before we even get into what Kali DAO does, like the compound governance framework, which I know is leveraged in the Kali DAO. And also, well, we'll start with that. Maybe just an explanation and how it's integrated.
Yeah, sure. I can take a stab at that. So the compound governance framework started, I mean, by its name, with compound finance, a DeFi protocol.
Yep.
They rolled their own governance token that they gave to people that staked assets into compound finance. Those people that had that governance token could then vote and change parameters on those DeFi contracts. The way they designed the compound contracts was very elegant, very simple, and we've seen it proved out over the last couple of years as a secure sort of bedrock for having a voting governance token. and a so-called governor contract that executes the results of those votes. So the compound, governance, token, like I said, is very simple, but it has a very good system for checking balances at certain checkpoints. Certain, block numbers on chain. It also allows delegation, and delegation we've seen as a very popular form of protocol governance, where not everybody wants to vote on everything, so they might elect representatives that have their voting weight that then weigh in on things on their behalf. You can always take your delegation back, of course, but it was those two pieces that I think really spoke to a lot of the space that were proved out as effective, by the market. So in terms of designing Kali and sort of upgrading the Moloch framework, there are a couple things we need to do. As present, Moloch DAO contracts are not tokenized. So your membership shares are not very visible. They're not very composable with other smart contracts. So converting the membership shares into an ERC20 token, that's one very simple step. And then incorporating the compound style of delegation of token voting weight, and also checkpointing balances so you can transfer tokens, but you can't double vote if you transfer a token to another account, are very important pieces. And sort of like introducing that to Kali, we wanted to incorporate things that already worked in the market rather than try and pontificate or speculate what people want. So rather than go into the rabbit hole of like conviction voting or quadratic voting or more experimental forms of governance, it was like, can we just take the Moloch framework, which works very well for clubs, for investing, for running businesses, and can we also take a protocol governance standard through Compound and merge those into a very simple smart contract set? Some improvements we did make over Compound was, instead of having several different smart contracts that need to ping each other, for example, in Compound, you have a time lock contract, you have a governor contract, and then you have the token contract. We've combined those into one single contract, which saves a lot of gas, actually. Every external call you do between contracts, you have to pay a premium for on a blockchain. So there are a couple optimization things that we did, as well as I think like feature enhancements and just like putting things to the same spot. So I think these things aren't rocket science, but I think it takes some strategy and like bringing something like this quickly to market and also making it secure. So we finished designing these smart contracts, I think in December. We went through audit for the next month or so, and then kind of alongside that, I had the help of expert coders like Jordan, Shivanshi Tyagi, who's a law student in India and also an active Lex DAO legal engineer, design the software and sort of the app on top of these smart contracts. But yeah, that's sort of the short run through why Compound, how Compound works, and how we're using it in Kali.
Great. And then maybe one term, maybe I should have put this up front. There's a lot of terms you got to cover, right? Just to make sure we're covered, is the Ricardian contract.
I can try to take a stab at this. And this will be good practice for me, Ross, because I know you know this backwards and forwards. You wrote this thing, but my understanding of the Ricardian contract concept is it's basically a contract that is both human readable and machine readable. It is relevant to both people and computers. And I think the reason that we're talking about Ricardian here is the Ricardian LLC smart contract that Ross developed within the past year or two. It's essentially a way to bring the limited liability format on chain, creating a Web3 native way to form a series LLC. And a series LLC is a little bit less common than just a typical LLC that get formed all the time. But a series LLC is recognized in at least a handful. I think a dozen or 24 states here in the United States, and from what I know, it's just a phenomenon in the U.S. right now. But essentially, what it allows is you register a master LLC with the Secretary of State. So you go to Delaware, you register an LLC, you check the box that it's a series, and then from there you can specify in the operating agreement of that master how you will form a child or a baby LLC, a series of that master. And so what that does is it removes the need to go back to the Secretary of State and knock on the door and say, hey, I want to register a company every time you want to spin off a series. Ross, you might have some thoughts to add there.
No, that was pretty picture complete. So kind of the trend that we're seeing, the ask by users, by anybody on the internet, is how can we have instant gratification and sort of like things now? There's an impatience to doing stuff online these days. So kind of the goal and what I see with things like series LLCs, with the trust framework that I think Mark Boren and DOIDX announced yesterday, as well as the UNA framework that David Kerr and others are sort of promoting, is can we have more of an internet native and friendly way to have limited liability protection without needing to file with the state, without having to do a lot of this off-chain Web2 maintenance. So these are, I guess, more novel, nascent legal strategies, but I still think they can be quite effective if done thoughtfully and with good faith, with good documentation. And yeah, we've read the Delaware statute backwards and forwards. We've tried to find as much case law as we can, and we don't see a problem with using these setups if you can at least follow the recommendations to keep assets separate, accountable, and blockchains are actually very good at that because by default they automatically account for things in a unique, cryptographically provable way. So I think there is an opportunity here to sort of like see, for internet entrepreneurs, can they sort of set these things up very quickly, wrap their wallets, wrap their DAOs, and be able to do business without having to entangle their personal assets. So it's a strategy and something that we did want to integrate into Kali early on, even though we do support people doing standalone or bring your own entities to our DAOs as well.
Right. And so how would a DAO implement a series LLC? Would it be each series would be for an asset for would that be the way, like you're basically segmenting out like sub DAOs? Is that the
Yeah, there's a couple ways, I guess, to approach this. The first way is probably what's more familiar to a series LLC, where you have like a specific real estate or maybe a single NFT or something that's very specific that you want to wrap as a series. We still think, for people that want to develop software, run a hackathon, have a member managed, venture, that they can, use a series LLC to accomplish those goals as well. So I think, for Kali's perspective, these sort of, Flash entities, the Series LLC that you meant through our site, I think would be very good for people that want to quickly gather people to accomplish a sort of short-term objective, similar to Constitution DAO. And then if it progresses into something that's, more meaningful and interesting, migrate and form their own standalone entity, and think more carefully about the jurisdiction they want to play in as well, for tax purposes. But the goal really is to try and limit liability and have people able to take more entrepreneurial risks online because of these, very near and present dangers of anything you do with money with strangers on the internet introduces legal liabilities, right? So it's like, can we at least like plug some holes? But nothing's ever complete. It's always a spectrum of risk and reward. But I think, legal engineers should try to meet people halfway here. So it is an option that we think people can run with.
Excellent. So now we covered some of the key glossary terms, and let's get into the Kali DAO offering itself. We've covered it a little bit, but maybe you can break it down for us.
Sure, Jordan.
Yeah, sure. So, for anyone who has played around with any DAO deployers, I think you'll find something that looks very familiar to DAO House or Aragon or something like that, where you hit app.kalidao.xyz and you fill out a pretty simple series of questions. Name your DAO, give your token a symbol. Again, we use the compound style governance token. Figure out who's going to be, a founding token holder, put their addresses in. There are a few other questions, opportunity to associate a legal entity, and we're kind of tweaking that framework right now. But so, the whole process is really less than a 5-minute process, and then you can deploy on mainnet, Ethereum mainnet, Arbitrum, Polygon, and then testnet as well, RinkB testnet. So then from there, what you'll find is a dashboard that it kind of shows just all the details of your DAO, who's a member, what's in the treasury, what legal entity has been linked up, and where are the governance documents. And then you'll also have the opportunity to create proposals, which are self-executing. So for those listeners who are really only familiar with the DAOs that vote on Snapshot, Kali DAO is a little different in that the proposals are self-executing. So let's say you create a proposal to pay someone who developed a website for your DAO, and you get a sufficient quorum, enough people show up and vote, and they vote yes. Then when that proposal is processed, the funds will automatically leave the treasury and go to that developer's wallet. So Kali is unique in that way, where there's no additional action needed. No management team, no physical governor, like Ross mentioned, a governor contract. The whole point is to be self-executing. So it's a pretty cool feature.
If you want it to, and you can also, like, because you have Rinkeby as your testnet, which I tooled around a little bit, it's also good if you want to do like off-chain. You don't want to pay the gas, you do off-chain voting. If that's just like a walk to run for your members, right? They don't necessarily want to go on chain right away for whatever reason. You have that option as well, and you can still leverage the whole framework.
Yeah, well, you make a good point, and this is because the platform is based on the governance token, the compound token. So unlike a Moloch where the membership interests are represented in something called a struct, I think, right, Ross? They're in structs. These are tokens, and so you can take those on snapshot and you can use them just like any other ERC20 token. And I think that a lot of DAOs will find that that's a good complementary approach because sometimes you need soft consensus. Sometimes you just kind of need to vote on something that it doesn't make sense to execute on chain. There's nothing that you can execute on chain. You're just trying to make a decision together. So I think that the two approaches can be complementary.
Yeah, particularly for smaller groups, right? And even for larger groups, I guess, if you have like subgroups. So when you click on Kali DAO, there's like a few different routes you can go. You can go the investment club route. I think then there's another one that's like, I got to remember. I should have brought it up, but like you can just do like almost like a social token. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. And then there's a third. What's the third? You should know. I'll just say yes. I'll say company. Yes because
I think it's company.
Okay. And so in terms of how you construct the entity, there's a number of different options that you get as well, right? They can form a Wyoming DAO LLC. They can form a UNA. They can form a Delaware LLC. Trying to think Swiss. You can do a Swiss Foundation. No, is it Swiss
Association?
Association. That's right. And what else? There's I feel like I'm missing some. Can you do a Cayman Foundation? No.
Yeah, we don't.
Well, here's the deal.
Go on.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Ross. No. I was going to say the deal is you can form whatever you want, but the question is whether it can be done completely on chain without needing to go knock on the door of a government filing office to ask permission, or whether it's so complicated that you absolutely have to engage counsel to help you draft those governance documents. So taking the Cayman Islands Foundation, for example, there's no reason you couldn't associate the memorandum and articles of association of a Cayman Islands Foundation, but you got to go form it. And really the same goes for some of those entity types you'll find in our drop down. It's not that there are no off-chain steps required, but we try to make it easier for folks to draft the legal documents just like you would on a Stripe Atlas or LegalZoom.
Yep. So like help them with the standard forms for the particular kind of entity that they want to form on chain, right? So like if you're going to do an investment club, this is what we would recommend, right? This LLC agreement, if that's what you're doing, just sort of gives you a chance to get going and like anticipates that it's going to be on chain. You can modify as appropriate, right? Yeah, I mean, it's when you're thinking about forming an entity in other jurisdictions like a Cayman Foundation, it's always stunning to me. Like if you want to form a Cayman Foundation as a lawyer, you hire your corporate services providers, after they do their 1 year upfront as well for the annual service fees, you're like, somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000. But like if you want to do a Delaware LLC, you're like under $1,000. It's just crazy. It's like it's amazing how easy it is. And you have to do like maybe a registered office or something like that. But generally, it's much easier. So in terms of forming an entity, like doing more of it through the Kali DAO application. In other words, some things you may have to associate, but some of the ones which you can easily do a ton. in terms of taking them from, in idea to formation? What are some of the other jurisdictions that you're looking at? Like, are you looking at, I mean, I haven't done my deep dive on Guernsey trusts yet. My deep dive, I've done a dive, just not a deep dive. Is that a candidate? Like, what are you thinking in terms of, possibly expanding that suite?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking at business trusts, including Guernsey, and what the Terra ecosystem has done as well for themselves. We are looking at Singapore as another jurisdiction, but we're mostly trying to stick to what we feel can be Ricardian, sort of as we discussed before. What can be most easily done purely online and sort of made effective through smart contract signatures. So there's probably more options that we will research and consider as we move forward. But mostly we're trying to keep our ear to the ground, listen to the crypto lawyer community, and see what we can come to consensus to on like what is a legally defensible way to do entirely internet native company formations. So LLCs, like you noted, are straightforward. They're cheap to set up. They're very differential to the members in terms of how they want to administer their rights and do everything on chain even. UNA is also very flexible, but we'll try and see beyond Swiss associations and contemporary forms that we might see in Singapore what can also provide those same conveniences. So Jordan, I don't know if you have other jurisdictions you've gotten recommendations about, but we're
Yeah,
game.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I think you covered kind of the ones that are a really good fit for Web3 native. But I think it's probably also worth pointing out that one of the things that we want to do is make it easier for DAOs to connect with lawyers to help them with some of the more complicated aspects. Initially, we have Team Kali. We're actually all either attorneys or, in Shiv's case, law student, budding lawyer. So we can certainly help point people in the right direction. But I think that that's a value add that we can provide as well. Is where we can't necessarily do everything completely on chain. We can try to connect people to the help they need.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think you've got the right approach there. I mean, to the extent it's Ricardian, it makes a ton of sense. To the extent you start to have to worry about engaging counsel in different jurisdictions, then it's a little bit like, okay, I can use this tooling a little bit, but I still have to go out and get counsel, and so it's not quite as fluid for what you're trying to accomplish, at least at the outset. I mean, again, maybe they can then expand into the tooling, which I guess gets into the next question, which is how do you see, so today it facilitates the governance side of it. It facilitates the initial setup and structuring of the DAO. What do you think are natural adjacencies to this? Like, is that, I mean, I'm sure, listen, we can talk expansion, but that, right now you have to, probably do a lot more even just to kind of harden what you got. But like, what do you see as some of the natural adjacencies for the future?
I mean, you said the word extensions or expansion. I mean, we are looking at apps that can be plugged right into the Kali smart contracts. The way we designed them allows other smart contracts to mint and burn shares and do other interesting things with the DAO. So the immediate things that we've offered to people is a way to like launch not only the DAO but also program a sale of their tokens to the public and also on a whitelist. We also allow people to make a tribute, escrow some money in exchange for shares if it gets passed and approved by the members. We allow people to also do interesting Moloch style rage quits if they want to exit with their capital and provide those minority rights protections. But I think that's kind of like the next level and in the parallel development track is like what other things that people want to do with the DAO that we can provide entirely on chain. And that'll probably be largely in the immediate future fundraising type applications. Jordan has drafted some really cool curves for doing fundraising, a logarithmic curve, which she could probably elaborate a bit on if she wants to. If you want to go into the
I
weeds
get
of
to talk about math. Yes,
yeah,
please.
but yeah,
Damn.
that's also very exciting. It's like, can we make the user experience and also like the capital efficiency opportunities of like launching a DAO and then having the entire internet at your disposal, like obvious, and also have a legal layer to that. But yeah, Jordan, you want to talk about the sort of what you've been drafting there?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think in software development, it's always good to, or even building a company, it's good to build a really awesome skateboard instead of just building, the wheel of a Maserati and then elaborate on that skateboard. And so I think that's the approach that we've taken in Kali, which has built a really solid base that we can then riff on. And so, one of the features that we can riff on is the crowd sale feature that we have. And I think probably most listeners are familiar with the crowdfund, crowd sale idea, but, a la Constitution DAO, people contributing funds in exchange getting a token, which could represent all any kind of thing depending on what the context is. And right now, the crowd sale extension is pretty linear. You set a price, and that's the price everyone pays. But you might imagine a scenario where you want to reward early purchasers, so they get a lower purchase price, almost kind of like a seed round raise versus a Series A. And so that's one of the things that we've been riffing on a little bit experimentally. And Ross mentioned the logarithmic curve. So I was a math major. I'm a little bit of a math nerd, and
go for it.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say this: I've noticed, the attempts at doing logarithmic computation on blockchain. It's very expensive and very complex. And so, my thought was, what if we just simulate that? Because it's a lot less computationally expensive and a lot less complicated to do that. And so we have kind of a synthetic logarithmic curve that's available on our GitHub somewhere, I believe, in one of the smart contract repositories. And it's unaudited, just throwing that out there, but probably will be audited at some point. And so what it does is it simulates a curve where, early purchases are buying down here. It gets more expensive, but eventually levels out. So that's kind of the idea of a log.
That makes a ton of sense. Excellent. And then do you see potentially Kali DAO as a platform to engage more directly with the projects themselves? Meaning Kali DAO, or like any other DAO where the DAO is in its formative stages, there's a lot you can provide in terms of added value and introduction, and even possibly, introduction to other investors. And again, I know there's a regulatory component to it for sure, but just do you see that as a potential direction, or are you like Eric, you're going way too far ahead? We're just kind of focusing on our knitting for now.
Yeah, I would say it's an obvious benefit if you have this network that all are using the same tooling, the same smart contracts, and they're discoverable on our website to make it easier to connect them. DAO contributors joining other DAOs, or investors, buying, DAO tokens. So an investment club on Kali DAO, or an investor, fund on Kali DAO should find it easy to sort of buy DAO tokens using sort of the apps we just discussed. The benefit of sort of our legal approach is that, issuers can have an entity between them and the investors, and they can also set up a whitelist. So we are experimenting with whitelisting. We are trying to harden the core app as well, as you've seen and we've discussed. But I think that's kind of the future, is people being able to curate who gets to join their DAO, but also in sort of the experimental lane of accredited investor token sales, using a master registry to make it so you don't have the repeat task of verifying people's qualifications just so they can participate and buy tokens that might need to be registered otherwise. So we've created a list like that through C Club and sort of the angel list they have, but we definitely want to focus on fundraising in the sort of next chapter of Kali, and really pursue this sort of idea of universal registries and hyper efficient Reg D compliant token sales, because I think that is sort of a really cool opportunity, because we have all these investors and users that will understand the app, and they should understand sort of our legal approach as well. But
right. Actually, I meant to double click on the whitelisting, because it's certainly something you're seeing across the whole space now, right? As you look at AML and KYC and is there a need for each and every single offering to do, collect that information and create unique honeypots for every single offering. If you can sort of collectivize it, of course, it now pushes the question to that honeypot itself. How do you secure it? How do you make it? How do you make that hard? But if you solve for that, and you create that whitelist that covers a lot of potential investors, then you sort of that's a real value add, because that is definitely a friction point. It's stunning how many times you have to do AML, and in a world where everybody's concerned about cyber hacking, it's like bizarre how much we actually have to give up our personal information every single time we touch something. It's just sort of this weird dichotomy of you have to protect yourself and you have to give everything you have away, multiple times. But
well,
so yeah, so that
I would be remiss as a lawyer to not just jump in and say, for those that are thinking of starting a DAO, potentially in a registered legal framework, it appears that stricter AML legislation and regulation might be coming in the U.S. I don't have a lot more information than that, but it seems like it's a global trend to require beneficial owner reporting. This is already in place in a lot of jurisdictions in Europe and I believe the Cayman Islands and places like that too. So it's good to just keep that on the radar. That shouldn't necessarily be cause for alarm, but there are potential just other regulatory check boxes that are going to have to be checked in the future. So just good to keep on the radar.
Yeah, for sure. And then I'm going to push this one step further. And again, which is real world assets. How do you real world assets is another, I'd say, a problem that has to be solved by the crypto community, which is, how do you, MakerDAO has tried to figure this out. There's a lot of different protocols that have tried to figure it out. Do you see RWA as being sort of a natural extension in the near, do you think there's things that you've done that sort of solves it more in the near term?
I think it's actually almost deceptively simple. Anything that you can represent with an agreement and then tie to a smart contract, I think accomplishes this idea of real world assets on chain. So if a DAO can do an asset purchase agreement and then through its fractional interests as DAO tokens hold an NFT or other token that has a legal link to that agreement, then I think we're already well on our way. We do, see the need to streamline a bit. The good news though is we've already, I think, done the formation piece quite well, and tracking governance docs and having it clear that the DAO as an entity could hold RWA. But we do want to make it easier to sort of create a proposal and attach sort of these RWA tailored agreements to then actually do these sort of off-chain transactions. So yeah, I think we are optimized for that. A DAO as an LLC is very well situated to hold real estate or do other sort of interesting transactions. Constitution DAO, as you all know, had an LLC make a bid on the papers. So a Kali DAO can do very much the same thing already. We just need to add a bit more education on the approach. This is the whole goal right now in a lot of crypto law is developing all these frameworks, and ideally our approach is software driven and the frameworks are efficient. So I think we can get there. But yeah, Jordan, do you have thoughts on how we can spread that? Yeah.
Totally. So, as a lawyer who deals with secure transactions a lot, I think one of the challenges I see, because I totally agree with Ross. You can tokenize anything, right? And so it just makes sense to tokenize real world assets. What will be challenging in this kind of in between period where, Web3 hasn't eaten the world yet, is figuring out how to utilize tokenization of real world assets in an interesting way, while at the same time not colliding with the mandatory recording and filing systems like the UCC and real property records. So just for example, let's say you're able to tokenize a unique asset and you try to take a code deference approach and you say the only way that you can transfer this asset or transfer a security interest in it is through our smart contract and through this token. That's all well and good, but the thing is that somebody in real life could then turn around and try to double convey that asset and purport to grant an interest through the recording system in place in that jurisdiction, whether it's the UCC or real property. And so I think that's kind of the sticky point right now, and the in between is figuring out, to the extent that those frameworks apply, how do we kind of navigate both? And I think that it's a solvable problem, and it might be through oracles, it might be through automating when something happens on chain, it needs to happen off chain as well. But I think it's a really interesting problem to solve too.
Yeah, so I'll take that to plug Professor Carla Reyes. She's who was just recently on the podcast talking about the UCC and the adoption of the UCC for digital assets, the revisions, because obviously there's a lot of gaps across states and it needs sort of a unified approach. But she's also sort of written a paper, I'll have to drop it in the show notes, with a framework for adopting like on-chain UCCs. So like, it would have to be, presumably it's only going to be the bigger jurisdictions that would adopt it, because you as you start to go out to the smaller jurisdictions, you're talking filing cabinets and pulling up the crinkly papers in between, right? I mean, it's not, there is automation for sure, but certainly if you want to move into this next stage, you first start with sort of the more tech forward jurisdictions.
Well,
and
I
that's
would push back on that a little bit, if I may.
Totally. I
think
don't have all the answers.
well, I mean, I think that's
Call
a
me
really
out.
reasonable argument, but I think a really reasonable counter argument. And I'm saying this as someone who's in kind of a smaller jurisdiction. I'm in South Carolina. It can be easier to affect change in smaller jurisdictions. And so you might be able to start the snowball rolling downhill a little easier in smaller jurisdictions where you can get the buy-in. So I definitely get the paper filing effect. Luckily, in my city and county, that's not a problem, but there are cities and counties in my state where it's very much an issue. But I actually am very optimistic that smaller jurisdictions may play a really big role here. And I think that really goes along with kind of the decentralized ethos of Web3 too. Everybody can make a difference and play a part and come together, even in a fragmented fashion. So I'm excited about what even smaller jurisdictions can do. I'm really optimistic about it.
Yeah, I mean, I makes you wonder whether there's an opportunity to sort of, go to a jurisdiction with a tech forward solution. And as part of that tech forward solution, also indicate how you could actually bring more on-chain dollars to that jurisdiction and maybe make it more. I mean, there'd have to be the opportunity. It'd have to be like, hey, we got something great. It's not getting out. We bring it on chain. It helps it get out. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly that, and that'd be a lot of fun to figure out the tooling for all of that as well, because there'd be a lot of problems, but I think solving them would be fun. So I'm going to return back to the dispute resolution, the arbitration that you talked about earlier, the on-chain governance, which I think is not part of Kali DAO, but something that you've dealt with within Lex DAO, right? Is that?
Yeah. So it's kind of just a necessity for groups like Red Guild who want to have clients pay them on chain, and the clients want the benefit of an escrow. So if there's non-deliverable, they can kind of get their money back. So I think things like Lex DAO as a community, like when I was I am a member of Red Guild as well, but basically they had this relevant issue of like clients will lose their keys, or there might just be issues with using a smart contract for business. So we need some sort of third party as a stopgap solution. So we deployed some DAOs on XDAI, actually an adaptation of the Moloch DAO. And I put some Lex DAO people in it. We've serviced a couple invoices that have gone wrong through Red Guild. And really, it's just this idea of like you can't eliminate the legal system or subjective layer to code, because like code doesn't always work. Or people disagree about, I don't want to sign this transaction to activate this smart contract because I don't like how this thing's going. So you do need lawyers, you do need somebody with authority or judgment skills to sit and be available for smart contracts. So we see groups like Claros, Aragon trying to create some sort of like game theory optimized way to get people to have good judgment skills. Jordan has, I think, pushed back along along those lines using her math and legal background. I think that's very helpful, but kind of, the next phase of on-chain arbitration, I think, will be spearheaded by Lex DAO, people in a sub-DAO that we're calling Curia to, scale this idea of like just have lawyers who are credible, experts on, business disputes, give them a role in a panel that can be reflected by a Kali DAO or multisig. And then, yeah, you can elect us to help you, move things forward. So yeah, I think that's going to be something that's going to be quite fun to build, as also an offering through Kali DAO.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So I didn't realize it was tying back. So, and you called it, did you say it was
Curia.
Curia. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Want to make sure I got that. So, Jordan.
Yeah. So, well, just to tag on what Ross said, well, as a math econ major, I'm obviously a big believer in leveraging technology to make things more efficient. Game theory, I think, is very interesting in aligning incentives. But I think, what is ODR? It's going to be kind of like the question, what is a DAO? That I think it can mean a lot of different things. I think that we're going to find, and this is from my perspective as a litigator, that there's not going to be a one size fits all solution. So, like Ross mentioned, Curia is trying to solve the problem of how do we bring a subjective layer to a contract dispute that is, that's run by qualified professionals. It's not just a bunch of lay people. I think that platforms like Aragon and Claros, in my impression, will probably be really good at deciding meta disputes and meta issues. But I think that where they will probably struggle is deciding more complex issues involving, evidentiary findings, trying to kind of, see the forest for the trees. There are reasons that pretty much all over the world over the past, several thousands of years, we've developed rules of evidence. We've put judges in charge of courtrooms because we used to lynch people, and we used to have monarchs cut people's heads off because reasons. And so I don't think that we will want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think we're finding that with corporate governance as well, with DAOs. And obviously that's something that we're touching on in Kali DAO. Is there's a lot that we can learn from, thousands and thousands of years of just corporate governance principle development. And I think we'll find the same in ODR. And, much like we have traffic court and small claims court and, federal court, criminal court, there probably won't be a one size fits all solution on chain either, in my opinion.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, if you think about one of the differentiating factors between Web 2 and Web 3 goes to some element of portability, right? And self-sovereignty. Well, who's going to enforce that? Right? Because if somebody has basically ownership or has something contained in their wallet that they're bringing, or there's more decentralization, like how do you, if it is being abused, if it's being taken advantage, if it's not following the rules, how are you going to enforce that? With Web 2, we don't have to worry about it, right? Because Web 2, it's like Twitter owns everything, right? So it doesn't matter, right? But if you're, the idea of Web 3 is that you're providing more of that self-sovereignty to the subject, to the party that's navigating through these different Web3 portals, there has to be some enforceability associated with it, or else you're back to Web2 all over again, which you might get anyway, right? Sometimes with these things, it's like, oh, Web3 is great. And it's like, yeah, we're eliminating the dictatorship of the Web2 overlords. And then you go into Web3 and now you have Web3 overlords. So, a properly designed dispute process might also mitigate that. And maybe it's something worth fighting for. So anyway, that's my view.
You're here.
So there's so much that we could talk about. But, is there anything that I missed that maybe we should have covered a little bit more, or you want to cover? Whether it's about Kali DAO or Lex DAO or,
Sure. I could say that there's another product and feature that's coming down the pike that actually was, kindly granted through LexPunk and was a donation to the Kali team. We're building a multisig solution to include some of the optimizations that we discussed, like on-chain doc hashing, some sort of like admin layer through extension apps, and also my own flavor of optimizations. We call it Club Sig. It includes some Moloch features as well, like the ability to claim funds out of the multi-sig contract by burning loot shares, which I've tokenized as ERC20 tokens, and each member of the multi-sig will have their own personal NFT. So there's a couple cool things that we are developing that I think will be nice to sort of contrast with other multi-sigs. I think the only other multi-sig in the market is Gnosis Safe, and they're doing an excellent job. But I think kind of the cool thing about legal engineering is we can move quickly and we can create things that are tailored to, corporate governance, like Jordan said, and we can build smart contracts that are like kind of what we want to see in the market. So yeah, be on the lookout for Club Sig, a Lex DAO joint effort. That'll be pretty interesting. It's an audit.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I can definitely tell you, having like looked at this very recently myself, your choices are, you start off with Fireblocks copper, and then you're like, well, can I do that lift? Right? A lot of times that lift is just way too big of a lift to kind of figure out for if you have like a small investment club or something like that. So then what's the next thing? Next thing is Gnosis Safe. And in between, I mean, you could go to Anchorage, but then again, you're pushing all the way up again toward the Fireblocks copper solutions, right? The multi-sig solutions that are fully managed. And maybe, sometimes those larger solutions also require a little more maintenance just to make sure you're doing it right. It's not just set it and forget it. So I'll definitely be on the lookout for that too. It's good to have another solution out there.
Yeah.
And I think one other thing I didn't ask was, is Kali DAO a sub DAO of Lex DAO, or is Kali DAO its own DAO?
That's a great question. Is Kali DAO a DAO? And I think we talk about this sometimes in our little developer chat. Do we call it Kali or do we call it Kali DAO?
Because you're servicing DAOs, I guess.
That's right, because we're protocol. But I mean, we're open source, and we're community driven, and we have community contributors. So I guess in that sense, we are a bit of a DAO. I don't know.
But you don't view yourself as a DAO. You view yourself as being a project within LexPunk, not LexPunk, Lex DAO.
Yeah, I guess all of our contributors are Lex DAO legal engineers. We're DAO members. We also have the certification or whatever. So I do think it is, naturally seen as a sub DAO. How does a sub DAO form? Is it through some sort of like confirmation through a DAO vote? I don't think so. I think they're just organic cells that form within a DAO and produce things that like add value to the overall DAO structure. So I think Kali does check those boxes, at least. I don't want to get too formalistic about these things because like I think if you need to like ask a DAO for permission to create a sub DAO, then like you're basically back to like square one with like corporate structures, and like I don't know, it doesn't really vibe with how quickly I think developers can move. But yeah, I think we kind of have that relationship with Lex DAO, and yeah, we also have like other partners like through Seed Club and with LexPunk as well. So
So maybe if I ask you if you're a sub DAO and you say, yeah, we're definitely a sub DAO, then maybe you're not a sub DAO. But if you say no, we're not a sub DAO, you may in fact be a sub DAO.
It is kind of one of those cat in the box situations or something.
Yeah. Ross doesn't even know, but you were very gracious. He's like, I don't even know how to answer Eric's question. It's at the tail end of the podcast, right? So listen, this was great. It was great having you both on. I think just very informative. We learned a lot about Kali DAO and just generally about on-chain formation of companies and some of the problems generally. So companies and DAOs, God, I got to be careful there. So generally, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
That was wonderful.